Urbosa's kinda cool, right? More so than anyone in the main cast, Urbosa knows what she is doing. She is framed as wise, powerful, and like the heels she treks deserts in, supportive. Her memories demonstrate a protective affection for Zelda, speaking on her behalf, consoling her. Urbosa recounts memories of her gal pal Zelda's mom in the DLC. After her passing, Urbosa takes on a mothership role for Zelda out of love for her departed friend. One way this is expressed is in the staging of the Va Naboris memory. Urbosa is facing away, talking over her shoulder as she nestles Zelda. There's a sense of protective distance, as if she is a buffer between Zelda and Link. Have her back by 10, or I pray you have a bottled fairy, mister. While Thunder Mom is neat, I couldn't help but realize how much mothering Zelda is an almost all-encompassing part of her action. After defeating the Thunder Blight, Urbosa is freed of her responsibilities. She savors the chance for personal revenge against Ganon. It's a glimpse at who Urbosa is when she can get outside of that role.
This really is as far as I can see. I would die in the wild. With the 1.5th coming of Breath of the Wild in Age of Calamity, our Rivali video became the most viewed on our channel by a pretty wide margin, which kind of resurrected this silently dropped series. I'm sorry to say that I can't make an Urbosa video that lives up to the expectations of the ones we have already set. How is that for irony? But instead, I'm gonna go way overboard, and we're gonna talk about something that I find really interesting, and hopefully you will too. We're gonna talk about how Breath of the Wild is an example of The Legend of Zelda's interesting stance in the game industry on gender. You waited this long for this video, you're not jumping ship now!
Breath of the Wild's Princess Zelda is my favorite rendition of the character, followed only by Project M.
Ooh, that's it. That is it.
But what makes this Hyrulean anthropologist stand out highlights problems with the narrative and, to a greater extent, the series itself. As the player pieces together Link's lost memories, we see Zelda is struggling to access the sealing power needed to stop Calamity Ganon. Her efforts to activate her divine lineage bring her a great deal of pain. Urbosa states these self-perceived failings are exacerbated by Link's success. In Zelda's mind, if she cannot live up to her destiny, she is a failure of a princess. But it is in this state of mind that she embraces a new identity for herself, a scholar. During one of her excursions, Zelda spots a flower called the Silent Princess. This flower is endangered, but can only grow in the wild. It's representative of Zelda. She cannot thrive in the cultivated realm she was born into. Notably, the shoot of the Silent Princess splits into two stems, where one flower is bloomed and the other has not. To me, this represents Zelda's conflict between the role she was given and the role she creates for herself. That is the wild where Zelda can flourish. The idea of
escaping
traditional practice extends to the divine beasts. They were not forged by the gods, but people. Anyone with the skill to pilot them can. The champions and the divine beasts representing all of Hyrule seem, in the past, as the true solution to Ganon. It's a narrative that aligns nicely with the game as a product. At a 2017 GDC panel titled Change and Constant, Breaking Conventions with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, some of Botwa's developers detailed the process of deconstructing the guided linear experience of past entries. Their model was, in part, the original game's spirit of open adventure. Traversing Hyrule's grandeur is far and away the most engrossing element of Breath of the Wild. To this day, I'm still overcome with wonder in the somber yet serene vistas of Hyrule. But I wish the challenge of convention carried into the narrative, which hangs over the experience like Ganon's corruption. Distant, even unseeable in spots, but never far from sight and mind. At the center is Zelda. Zelda unlocks her power through an act of self-sacrifice, protecting Link from the Guardians. On its face, this is cool. It's a reverse of the scenario that is the catalyst for Zelda beginning to respect Link, corny and stereotypical as that scene is. Subsequent to Zelda's awakening, she falls into her historic role, imprisoned in some action or place, awaiting Link for rescue. It is framed perhaps more progressive, as Zelda actively holds back Ganon from spreading corruption. She is not technically his prisoner, but the result is more or less the same. Zelda is praying off-screen until the hero arrives. But out of everything Zelda has done, why is this the moment that unlocks the power? She has been training to unlock the sealing magic since childhood. She furthered Hyrule's understanding of the Sheikah technology along with her allies. She wasn't neglecting Hyrule or her own destiny. As I see it, the game proposes two views. King Rowboat scolds Zelda for what he believes is her spending too much time researching the Sheikah tech. Stop playing in your room, go outside. This would seem to say that, at least from his perspective, Zelda's embrace of a role outside of her historic norm is her failing, the reason she can't access her magic. The king acknowledges that the Sheikah technology is important. To be fair, the player would have a hell of a time without Zelda's contributions to the Sheikah slate. However, the king's assessment is spoken in this dismissive tone, and he states it is not Zelda's place to be involved with the Guardian research.
Do you know how the gossip mongers refer to you? That you are the heir to a throne of nothing. Nothing but failure. It is woven into your destiny that you prove them wrong. Do you understand?
Yes.
Now, the king is bad and wrong, right? How can you watch this scene and not think that? This memory is in a place early players are not likely to get to, so it is more likely they are going to be aligned with Zelda's plight. I'm not doing another take. There's mosquitoes out here. It's a lot more likely that you're going to be aligned with Zelda's plight. So, I don't think this was intended to be read as Zelda's failing. But keep this scene in mind.
For the second view, I'm drawn to this moment in a later memory where Mipha attempts to give Zelda advice. It is implied that she accesses her magic by thinking of Link, who she is romantically in love with. A major portion of the memories are dedicated to Zelda's growing relationship with Link, starting from a reminder of all her failures till...
The game seems to be implying that Zelda's failing is not giving everything for Link.
Anything could finally spark the power to seal Ganon away. We just have to keep looking for that thing.
In her piece, The Growing Hollowness of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, critic Grace Benfell highlighted the centrality of Link to Hyrule. Everything and everyone in this world, despite having survived for a century without him, exists for Link's personal journey. The Sheikah wait in stasis in the shrines made especially for you, perishing after their use. The champions, symbols of a Hyrule more cooperative than any previous entry, each with their own unique abilities and skills to lend to the collective effort of defeating Ganon, they all die and pass their skills on to you. And no matter what Zelda does or wants, she must exit the spotlight for the real star. She can be a sage and a scholar, says the game, but never not Link's sage.
What if, one day, you realized that you just weren't meant to be a fighter, yet the only thing people ever said was that you were born into a family of the royal guard, and so no matter what you thought, you had to become a knight. If that was the only thing you were ever told, I wonder then, would you have chosen a different path?
In Zelda, Benfell sees the greatest tragedy. She is trapped by a narrative that is not her own, and that she could never choose. In some ways, Link is too, but for him, it is empowering. He gets to go on a freeing adventure around the world, but Zelda remains alone. The game sympathizes with her plight, but ultimately considers it necessary. There is no way out for her but to push through, confined by the role fate placed her in. When I saw the Silent Princess in my first playthrough, I assumed the bud represented Zelda's scholar path. One day it would bloom with the life Zelda made for herself, and in a greater sense, represent a new direction for a character historically restricted to being a prisoner. In the true ending, the camera sweeps over a mass of silent princesses, buds unchanged from the memory. It's a tepid, repetitive notion seemingly exclaimed by the AAA gaming industry at large. Maybe next time, the bud will bloom. Maybe next time!
We expressed a lot of love for Revali in our video on him, but as I think about what I don't like about Breath of the Wild, I wish we had framed him not as a dramatic tragedy, but as a missed opportunity. Because I now feel about Revali the same way I feel about Zelda. I love the character that Nintendo almost wrote.
But what's that got to do with gender?
Rebalancing the Triforce is an analytical paper written by now Doctor of Communications and Culture, Sarah Stang. It is an assessment of Link's character design and its place within the larger discussion of gender representation in video games going on in Western culture. A crux of the paper is examining Link's androgyny, both as a means of player expression, projecting identity onto the player avatar, and as an appealing factor of Link for Western audiences who see the character as a positive example of gender diversity. What is androgyny? Well, this is likely where we're going to draw some discussion in the comments, because the concepts I'm going to be discussing from here on out often have very personal cogitations. So, broadly, to understand androgyny, we need to know about gender expression. This is the externalization of gender through things like fashion, physicality, speech, and other acts. It is the companion to gender identity, which is the internal conception of gender. Androgyny is a combination of culturally understood aspects of masculine expression and feminine expression. Accounts I've heard from those who express androgyny speak of it in terms of freedom from imposed notions of how people act or dress, or they function as challenges to ingrained assumptions of gender.
As Stang recounts for us, the objective for Link's original design was creating a blank slate for many players to project onto. Link's androgynous appearance is a key component of that. To a Western audience accustomed to a mainstream industry awash in titles featuring mostly normative or hyper-masculine male protagonists, we may applaud the Zelda games for headlining an alternative male. Stang seeks to inform us that in a Japanese context, Link's design is not so noteworthy.
Gender is a social construct, and thus standard perceptions of gender, how someone should express themselves and how someone should exist and act in society, are going to vary from one culture to another.
Rachel Snyder's thesis paper, The Androgyne Patriarchy in Japan, Contemporary Issues in Japanese Gender, examines the historic and cultural forces that influence masculinity in modern Japan. Snyder outlines that masculinity in the post-World War II era was formulated as a result of the political desire for men to restore the economy and parent children, and not, as in the West, as explicitly, if at all, informed by fear of As the Japanese state's influence over masculinity waned in the post-economic boom period of the 90s and 2000s, outlier expressions of masculinity were allowed to merge into the mainstream, including that of the androgynous male. One way in which Japanese masculinity differs from Western ideas, Snyder argues, is that Japanese male androgyny is accepted as an expression within the male-female binary, and thus it loses subversive power. Snyder provides the history of the onagata, men who played women in kabuki theater, who so visually transformed that they were effectively considered female, even when viewers solicited them for sex after shows. Regardless of their biology or identity, to theater goers and the law, these men were viewed as women. But with modern androgyny in the general Japanese zeitgeist, men who express androgyny do so in a way that still visually communicates male. Due to the visual nature of the culture, gender is almost impossible to differentiate from sex, meaning that cross-dressing, drag, and androgyny have no real powers of subversion. Snyder goes on to describe how Japan hosts two binaries at once, The West's, which came with the post-war occupation by America, is subverted by androgyny that draws from the historically Japanese binary, where maleness is allowed a fluidity that biological females performing femininity are not. Hence, the androgyne patriarchy. If we accept this, then Nintendo's portrayal of Link as an androgynous male is, as Stang argues, a more conservative design by the Japanese standard. Masculine-skewed androgyny continues to be extremely popular in Japanese artwork, comics, and animation, as well as among Japanese musicians and models. Similarly, masculine-skewed androgynous protagonists are not uncommon in JRPGs. Many male characters exhibit relatively few secondary sex characteristics or fall into the bishonen or beautiful boy aesthetic category, with slender bodies, feminine features, and long hair. As Stang observes, with only one exception we'll get to, no matter what armor you wear, Link is, to the characters of Hyrule, identifiably male. He may incorporate aspects of both genders, but he does so in a way that maintains his gender as male, which Stang thought made the incident surrounding the introduction of Breath of the Wild's Link to the world all the more interesting. In this early teaser for Breath of the Wild, there was a character who shared many physical features of Link, but lacked iconic design elements. Where are the tights? Coupled with a cryptic comment, fans began to discuss whether this was a female Link, a male Zelda, or some new character. A few years of heavy speculation down the line, and Aonuma apologizes for confusing people. Apparently, he only meant to say the design was not final. This boy, not grill. Aww. A female protagonist was considered in the form of Princess Zelda, but was rejected. When asked why, Aonuma gave this, incomprehensible nonsense. There's the idea of the Triforce in the Zelda games we make. The Triforce is made up of Princess Zelda, Ganon, and Link. Princess Zelda is obviously female. If we made Link a female, we thought that would mess with the balance of the Triforce. That's why we decided not to do it. Ah yes, the gender trinary. Girl, guy, Ganon. Thankfully, Aonuma cleared all of this up by asking the important questions, like... Longtime Zelda series director and producer, game system director of one of the most beloved and influential games of all time, and a superior sequel, flummoxed by the notion of a female protagonist. I think Link should get into game design. In our Rivali video, we touched on how the Zelda universe is essentialist. People are born with qualities that define them, and pursuing this essence will lead towards their best life. It's the stay in your lane of philosophies. What Aonuma's comment highlights is that this view, to some degree, extends towards gender in Hyrule. We can't make a female the hero because the hero is male. Obviously, it's the essence of the Triforce, which was made by 3 goddesses. Of course, we can't ignore the economic angle here. The series' deification of its formula, coupled with these kind of statements, suggests Nintendo fears its target demographic will reject any kind of change. It's a sad reality that AAA gaming still courts a largely male audience, which has created a loop indoctrinating capital G gamers into the idea that games are only for men. It doesn't help that the women in AAA gaming are so homogenous in design that any deviation invokes the kind of embarrassing reactions from men not even Daruk's protection can deflect. She has man face! How can she spot robot jugulars without her wings? Stang goes on to suggest part of the discourse surrounding the teaser is the result of a long-held desire for a playable non-male Link and/or playable Zelda. This desire is satisfied only in spin-offs, where Nintendo plays the role of producer with a separate team building the game, such as Hyrule Warriors. A swath of classic Zelda characters are playable, including a number of returning female characters and 2 original ones. The game has its issues, but many of the playable cast in the story mode of the base version are female, including a Zelda who fights on the front lines. And is that a woman with the Triforce of Power? Hey guys, remember the balance? Oh no! According to Aonuma, discussion of a playable Zelda for Breath of the Wild inspired Yosuke Hayashi, a producer for Warriors, to include a female Link in the game, Linkle. The thing with Linkle is that if you analyze her as a female Link, you're likely to be disappointed. In the text, she believes she is the reincarnation of the hero. She even has her own magical MacGuffin a la the Ocarina or Wind Waker as proof of her claim. While certainly heroic and skilled, she stumbles into her adventures by accident. Her heroic acts are the result of her happening into the middle of battles. Despite her destination being clearly signposted, she misses Hyrule Castle and gets lost immediately after setting out. Linkle ends her story proclaiming herself the legendary hero with Link on the doorstep. Metatextually, we might call her a female Link, but canonically, she explicitly isn't. She's a parody. The joke is at the expense of those who want a female Link. You might say that's a stretch, but this is also the game where one of the main antagonists is a woman who has observed every incarnation of Link and is corrupted to evil by Ganondorf because she keeps getting cucked by Zelda. I did not make that up. The game has 2 instances where parallels are drawn to Zelda fans, specifically women, and they're either villains or jokes. I doubt this was intended, but it's kinda weird. And all this isn't to say you can't like any of these characters. Goddess knows the in-universe cosplayer has fans, and I think there is something compelling about a character who isn't a destined hero, but saves the day through their own efforts. Once again, a character I almost love. But how is it Hyrule Warriors team ended up with this character? Stang quotes a comment on a 2014 Kotaku article highlighting the female Link debate. What it says to me is a female character design whose femaleness isn't emphasized. That alone would be refreshing and awesome, regardless of who the character actually is. Stang urges us to bear in mind what we have learned from Snyder. In a Japanese view, Link's androgyny is a part of his masculinity. This perception of the character having unemphasized femininity potentially highlights our own cultural leanings. From a conservative Japanese perspective for design, a female Link must be feminine, so that requires a dramatic shift across the binary into a slimmer area of expression. To this perspective, she has to look and play the part. It isn't enough to just say, she's a woman. But the series has seen the title character break away from her normative role. Really, Kevin? This is all the footage we have. As Stang observes, Zelda has disguises that allow her to escape her pursuers and damsel in distress role. Sheik is an androgynous character who assists Link in Ocarina of Time by providing crucial knowledge and useful magic. But once Sheik is revealed as the very feminine Princess Zelda, she is quickly captured. This is the cheapest raising of stakes possible. You'd think. Hey Zelda, it's been a few weeks. I know you've been here in the basement. How's it go? Zawoot, bitches! Tetra is a tomboyish pirate captain, selfish at times, but ultimately a good person, who assists Link in rescuing his sister. When Tetra is revealed to be Princess Zelda, she's transformed into the classic pink attire and, she's forced to remain in hiding until she is kidnapped. Twilight Princess's Zelda has a sword. She drops it. But despite their temporary nature, Stang argues these disguises establish a non-gender normative presence in the games. Although the Legend of Zelda series primarily features a masculine-skewed androgynous character, it has also provided space for feminine-skewed androgyny, and for a female character to gender-bend her way into a more active role. Donning a disguise to enter a space or role normally unwelcome to women in Japanese society is common in their media. In a presentation about her book, Femininity, Self-Harm, and Eating Disorders in Japan, Dr. Gita Marianne Hansen describes contradictive femininity, a concept she developed to express the conflicting roles Japanese women feel expected to fill.
So I looked into different sociologists and different historians working on Japanese culture. They said it all in different ways, but basically what they were saying is that navigating contradiction is a key competence that women today must manage. Women have to be both objects and subjects. They have to be passive and they have to be active. They have to be quiet, but at the same time they have to be vocal, and so forth.
She identified character archetypes in modern Japanese art and stories emblematic of this schism. One being
the transforming character.
This is someone who navigates the friction of subject and object femininity via some kind of transformation. While this concept of feminine expectations is not vocally explored in Ocarina or Wind Waker, I think Zelda's transformations embody this idea. Zelda and Tetra don't even seem like the same person. Tetra is a pirate captain, the epitome of free-spirited career nut. Zelda is demure, takes the blame for things she can't control, and drops everything for Link and the King. The Zelda of Breath of the Wild does not literally transform, but is defined by her conflict with the expectations of her lineage, which sees her in dresses and forging her own path where her attire is comparatively less gendered. Though I agree with Stang's view that the transgressive presence of Zelda's transformations are valuable, I don't think I'm alone in the disappointment their transience summons. Zelda's transformations push the narrow limits various cultural and economic pressures confide femininity within, till they're inevitably roped back into Nintendo's stifling definition of their princess, which has pervaded as Zelda's ideal form in her narratives for decades now. Video game criticism's own old man in a cave, Tevis Thompson, shares my dismay in his essay, Saving Zelda. At their best, Zelda's central characters can offer nuance or temporary effect, but the very nature of Zelda's iterative narrative makes it hard for anything to stick. Even the more vibrant versions of characters are hamstrung by the larger narrative's conservatism. Get your crown on, princess. Go to sleep. Media plays a predominant role in how we view the world, and thus it is imperative that it does not tunnel itself into a narrow view of how people exist. As America and Japan are modern countries with a huge pull in the world market and popular culture, their art and what informs it is worthy of critical examination, especially when they pull from people and cultures who have less say in how they are represented. Well, I said I'd have this video out in August, and by gum, you did it, Kevin. Good job. You failed. This is why the algorithm hates you. I am once again in the position of having to split a long-ass video into 2 parts. This time, my excuse is I make a living wage now and have 40 to 50 less hours a week to work on videos here. I'm not incompetent. I have the job to prove it. All the live action, all of the gameplay, all the audio, it's all recorded for the second part. I just gotta edit it. Still no Urbosa in it at all. I'm just gonna disappoint you right off the bat here. There will never be an Urbosa.
Ever happy?